Following the 4 questions about the obvious mitzvahs of the Seder, we immediately launch into beginning to recount the Exodus. Avadim, Hayinu, we were slaves to power in Egypt, and God took us out of there with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. We have to understand what is this duality, the difference between the strong hand and the outstretched arm. And then we go on to say, Hashem would have not taken out our forefathers from Mitzrayim, we and our children, our children's children, would have been indentured slaves to power in Egypt. Now this is something which really begs an explanation. We, our children and children's children would have still been slaves to Paro in Mitzrayim. The Egyptian empire collapsed a long time ago. It ceased to be a world power. The Egyptian people even went into exile for a certain period of time. So why would we and our children's children still remain slaves to Paro? The Egyptian empire collapsed and crumbled. It's more than reasonable to assume that we would have gained our independence just by the fact that the Egyptian empire crumbled, if not for the fact that maybe in course of time we would have blended with the populace anyway. So this is something which really needs an explanation. Why would we and our children, all the generations be slaves to Paro if God would have not taken us out then, all those years ago? So there are a few explanations, but the one I would choose to focus on, which I think is the one most meaningful for us today. You have to understand that there is a inherent difference between a slave that has escaped and becoming freed through a legal process, and between the former two and being freed by an act of God. Right. The first way, a slave that escapes, he is in essence a slave, just his master doesn't have access to him. So, of course, the person just escapes, he's a slave, he's not really free in so much as that his master is barred access to him. So for sure, if we would have escaped from Egypt, so we would still be Paro's property, and everything that would branch out from that, and not just that legally we would still have to work for him, but also existentially we would be under him totally and absolutely, and it would just be by incident, just for extraneous reasons that we're not working for him, but really we should be. Right? And to differentiate between that and being legally free, so legally free means you don't have a monetary obligation to work for your master for free. Right? But being legally free, getting a bill of release, right, that doesn't make you a better person. That merely just takes off your obligation to serve your master. But Yetzias Mitzrayim, it goes way above these first two aspects. Yetzias Mitzrayim is not to bar Paro from having access to us, right? It's not just about severing our legal obligation to work for him, as every slave has a legal obligation to work for his master. It's not about that. It's about, as we said already many times before, putting us on a whole different plane of order, that we live by Hashem's law and order. We're under Hashem alone. So the Exodus is all about becoming better people, right? Becoming a people that live by the higher order that we've already mentioned a few times over. So that's what it means. If God would have not taken us out of Egypt, we and our children, children's children, right, would have still in essence been slaves to power. It means that in terms of our humanity, it wouldn't be called that our humanity progressed any, even though for sure it's very safe to assume that logistically speaking, we wouldn't be working for Paro, but as being a higher state of human existence, living by God's order, and being answerable only to God, that wouldn't have happened. Right? That's what it means. If God would have not taken us out, we would have been under Paro. But we still haven't expressed the full depth yet, because it says we and our children, our children's children. There's something being alluded to over here, something that's mentioned in two other places later in the Haggadah. Right, that b'chol davar dor chayav adam liros atzmo kilu yotzei mitzrayim. A person has to view himself in every generation as if he himself, left Egypt. Similarly, later, just a few lines later, in that place in Haggadah, it says, "Lo samseinu bilvad osanu gali mayim." God didn't just save our forefathers; He saved us along with them. There's a concept that God didn't just take out that generation from Egypt, and as a result, by domino effect, so all the rest of the generations are also free men. That's not the way to look at it. You have to look at it that God took out all the future generations from Egypt. At the moment He took out our forefathers, He took us out with them, meaning that God took out all the generations. Not that He took out one generation, and just by domino effect, since that generation is free, so their next generation was born into freedom, and generation afterwards was born into freedom, as if the freedom is just incidental because our forefathers were freed, right? So we're also free. That's not the way to look at it, right? We have to look at it that the Exodus happened to us, that God was looking at all the future generations at the time they took our forefathers out. And what difference does it make, you may ask? The difference is like this: the generation that was directly taken out by God, they could never ever work for Paro again, not just physically, because they were saved from Paro, and they were taken away, long distance away from him. Right? But they also saw the revealed miracles, right? They could never ever regress in any way to the state that they were in. But we didn't see all those miracles, right? We just told by our forefathers, this is what happened to us. So our freedom may not be as real to us as it was to them, that they experienced these miracles. They have the power of the Exodus in them. They lived it. They absorbed it. Right? They saw it with their own eyes. They heard it with their own ears. They absorbed the spiritual lights that were revealed at the time. So you might think that the power of the Exodus is innately theirs, and we're just like hanging on their coattails, but we don't have that same type of experience of being way elevated above the state of being Paro slaves. So for us, perhaps it's reversible, that we're born free, right? We're born in the state that our forefathers happen to have been at, because that's how every child is born, into the status of his family. But since we don't have the actual power of the Exodus on us and in us by experience, so maybe we could regress to being in a state like being Paro slaves. So that's what the Haggadah is pointing out here. The power of the Exodus, God put that power into all the generations. When He looked at that generation He was taken out of Egypt, He saw in them all the future Jews that are going to be born, and had in mind that He's taking them all out, that the power of the Exodus is in all the Jewish people forever. It's impossible for us to ever go back to being in a state parallel to that type of state that they were in, of being slaves to Paro. We can never be so subservient to a foreign power other than Hashem. It can never happen to us, because Hashem put the power of Exodus into all the generations. And that's what's also being alluded to over here. God took all the generations out with our forefathers. So the power of being under God alone wasn't just to that generation that God interacted with physically, directly, as in physically. God put that power into all the Jews that were ever going to be born from that generation. So none of us could ever go back to being in a state parallel to being slaves to Paro and Mitzrayim. With this, we can now go back to the beginning and understand this between a strong hand and an outstretched arm. Strong hand refers to the force. There was a tremendous amount of force that God did the Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Exodus, with all the miracles and how He beat up on Paro and the Egyptian people, all the revealed miracles. Outstretched arm refers to how God spanned many generations. The arm outstretched is that He reached across time, and He put that power into all the future generations of the Jewish people. And that the Exodus, the power of it is in us. Nothing that happened to our forefathers that we are recounting. It's something that happened to us. That power of what happened to our forefathers is in us. God implanted in all the generations. That's the outstretched arm, and it's because of the outstretched arm aspect that God put this power in the Jewish people across time. It's because of that we can never be in a state like being enslaved to power in Egypt.